Welcome to Best Practices when Assessing English Learners, Part 2. We're here. I am Andrea Bertoni. I am the Speech and Language Education Consultant at the Department of Public Instruction, and we are here again with Courtney Seidel, who is a clinical professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In case you would like to have some rule change resources handy, the new rule that went into effect on August 1st, there are many supports on the Assessment Tools webpage, the last link here on this screen. But the ones that you may want to share with administrators or others are the first two, the summary of changes and the revisions to speech language impairment identification, where it's the side-by-side with the previous rule and the new rule. There's also, on September 15th, we did a digging deeper around the criteria webinar, and that is on the website. That is part of the fourth link. So check those out.
For those of you who were with us in day one, welcome back. And please get out the worksheet that you had. So finding a targeted student to apply this work to. So I definitely like more of an interactive application type training. So we're going to do that today. And again, if you don't have that, you can also find that in the participant list in day one. Okay, so you are likely familiar with this 4-part model for comprehensive assessment, as it has played a part in the new criteria and a lot of the trainings that Andrea has been organizing for us. And you'll see that all of the areas that are highlighted in yellow are going to be components that we will address today. So as you think about your comprehensive assessments and you're wondering how you might incorporate some of these things, perhaps come back to this slide from day one and day two, and you can see that you'll have direct examples of how to apply these items to your assessments going forward. Okay. So today we're going to build your toolkit a little bit more. We're going to add to it. So we want to make sure that you are leaving with resources and examples that are truly applicable to you. So I really try to offer you things that you can walk away even back to the office tomorrow and start using some of these tools should you find yourself a miss an eval for a dual language learner. Again, I will use dual language learner as we proceed, as that encompasses the holistic child, not that English is favored or that we're looking at English in particular. We're looking at the duality of a dual language learner. So again, if you tend to use EL or ESL, just know that that is synonymous and one of the preferred terms. You'll also see culturally and linguistically diverse used. Okay, so we're going to add the can-do descriptors. I've been getting a lot of questions about dynamic assessment, so I'll elaborate on that as it applies to dual language learners, and I'm going to give you a specific tool to add to your evaluation process. As I mentioned, I'm going to have you look at and think about how this applies to a particular student. So we're going to jump right into the can-do descriptors. And what I want to remind you is that when we started in day one, we were talking about the importance of a good referral. If we want to make sure that we're accurately identifying dual language learners as a difference or a disorder, then we need to really focus on having the appropriate information to ensure that the referral for special ed is warranted and needed. So everything we talked about in day one are things that would be applied pre-referral. We often find that for our dual language learners, we jump to a referral far faster than we would for our monolingual English speakers. So we want to make sure that we have that mounting evidence and that we know a referral is appropriate. So, right, we're going to make sure we're using those red flags, the stages of language acquisition, we're exploring their access scores. Those are all readily accessible and very important components to understand about your dual language learner before you refer for special education. And the can-do descriptors are a direct link to your access scores. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what they are, and then I want to give you a moment to get your hands on them and really think about using them for your students. So as I said, you've looked at your students' access scores, and now it's time to transfer that information to the can-do descriptors that are free and available to you through WIDA. So what the can-do descriptors are is they're a tool to help you understand a student's English language development and meet them where they're at. It highlights what learners can do, hence the name, the can-do descriptors. And when I say it highlights what dual language learners can do, we're saying given their current English language proficiency, what should we expect them to be competent in doing in the classroom? And this is very important because we're trying to shift our lens. If we have grade level and age level expectations for our dual language learners, we may be setting the bar too high. Why would we expect a dual language learner to perform above their English language proficiency level in the classroom? So it provides these expectations across different content areas, which I'll touch on, and it compares dual language learners to other bilingual students. Not only that, but to grade level expectations for dual language learners. And it also individually tells us what we can expect for your target student. So not just third grade in general, but for your Joey in third grade individually, what should we expect for his performance? And when we're considering if a referral for special education is warranted, the question you are answering is Joey performing at his English language proficiency level? Because if he is, then it's likely that he's meeting his potential as a dual language learner, and that it could be more in line with a difference than with a disorder. So let's dive in a little bit deeper. This is the what do I like about these can-do descriptors. So these are my, my preferences and things that I highlight as benefits personally. It uses language that's familiar to your team. This is building off of the access scores. So whether you're talking with LEAs, administrators, EL staff members, hopefully teachers, these would be things that are familiar to your team members. And this is a big one because we need to be efficient, uses information we already have access to. You don't need to go out and collect more. This is readily available to us. And again, this is the big one. It compares bilingual students to bilingual students, which can be so hard to find. And I say all the time in my presentations, if you find other tools that truly compare dual language learners to other bilingual students, please hook me up because there's like a handful of these. And so we really want to make sure that we are setting that expectation that's appropriate for our dual language learners, and that we don't continue to expect them to reach those expectations for our monolingual English speaking grade level standards. Because again, they're at a different point in their ability to use language in the classroom. And often there's a discrepancy between where their English language proficiency level is and the level of English needed to meet those grade level standards. And we have to acknowledge that. Again, why would we expect a student to perform above their English language proficiency level in the classroom? Okay, I want to touch on Angelina's comment in the chat real quick. So Angelina, you said you're not getting access to the access scores in your district. This is something that I think I might have a quick fix for. So typically in whatever your platform is, whether you're using Skyward or Infinite Campus or EduClimber, this information is in that system. And there's different gatekeepers, right? We all get access to the information they think we need to know. And this one is overlooked. Sometimes, like for example, EL staff or curriculum staff, they might have access to the access scores, but it's usually a pretty quick fix if you can reach out to the person who communicates with IT supports, and you can just tell them, hey, all of special ed really need access to the access scores. Could you please grant us that privilege? And then it'll show up as like a tab, usually like EL or something like that. So if you are not seeing that, and that's a great on-task item, you guys can all log in and see, do I have access to access scores within my platform? And if you don't, send an email out saying, this is information that we need for our special education evaluations. And it's usually, unknown that you needed that information and just needs to be like a click of the button. So hopefully that could help. Okay, awesome. All right, well, I'm going to proceed with our can-do descriptors. I wanted to point out that if you are a paper-based person, you can get these printed out for a small fee from WIDA. You will see that on their website. Otherwise, these are all available free and digitally. I actually wanted to make life a little easier for you, and I put all of them in the participant folder. So just hang with me. Don't start searching through them all yet, because I'm going to guide you towards what you might like or need. All right, so this is a big one for my early childhood people. So one thing that we know is that very often early childhood teams report that they don't have as much information on their dual language learners. So they often don't have a home language survey. They can't have access scores yet. And so this is a gold mine for our early childhood teams for dual language learner evals. If your EC people are not here, this would be a really good item to share with them, the can-do descriptors for the early years. And before I move forward with this one, I wanted to highlight that many of the districts that I support related to dual language learning evals, a simple change that we make is that the home language survey is given to early childhood. It is not mandated or required, but many teams are like, there's no reason you can't offer it to them. And it is extremely helpful for many teams. So if you're looking to make those small changes to your procedures and your policies, you might consider talking with someone about distributing the home language survey to dual language learners in early childhood. And some opt to just do that if you're concerned, if you're looking at potentially having these discussions around eval. So I hope that's a helpful tip, but one that many teams have liked. Okay, so for early childhood, they don't take the access test, right? We talked about that starting in kindergarten during day one. But WIDA has created benchmarks, milestones for development for dual language learners who are 2.5 to 5.5. And so this is going to provide examples of language use for 3 overarching communicative purposes. That includes how they express themselves, recounting, and inquiring. And it lists both expressive and receptive language. And WIDA calls these communicative purposes key uses. And so they're identified based on reviews of literature, empirical research on language use in preschool settings, and a language analysis of early childhood standards. So we know that these are evidence-based and they align with the early childhood standards. So I would highly encourage you to consider looking through these and sharing them with your early childhood team. Because one of the statements that I get often is that teams aren't sure. You're like, well, I don't know. I always say, like, when do we pull the trigger, right? Like, when do we say, yes, we're going to move into an eval, or no, this isn't something we should be concerned about? And unfortunately, that unsure feeling often results in a, oh, well, refer to find out. And we do see, because you can actually look at your referral rates for minority populations as well as your identification of disability in those populations. And we do see that the referral rate is quite high. So we want to be thoughtful and intentional and make sure that if we move through to an evaluation, we have substantiated evidence telling us that a disability is likely. Because I always say, right, that you wouldn't just refer to find out if a child has a reading disability. You have substantiated evidence that a learning disability in reading is likely before you go to a referral. And again, many teams report that they don't feel like that's the case for our dual language learners and that we refer to find out. So again, you're going to use your red flags, your stages of language acquisition, your access scores, and your can-do descriptors to make that decision as to whether a referral is warranted. So now beyond early childhood, we're going to move into the other grades. So they have grade clusters, and you can see those listed there. Again, my example was the grades 2 to 3. There's a number of reasons why the clustering is applicable, but I won't go into the details. I want you to know what they are and how to use them. There are 2 options. They're both fabulous, but there are 2 options in your participant folder, and I wanted to highlight what they are for you. The first are called the original edition, and these are organized by language domains. And I said this when we talked about access scores, but SLPs, this is our jam: speaking, listening, reading, writing. This is all expressive and receptive language modalities. And so they can be extremely informative for us. And that's how my current example is. You'll see lots of them, but for those of you who might like an example, you're going to see that I have along the left side here, I have listening, speaking, and then reading and writing. And these are for grades 2 and 3. And then the way the rest of the rubric is organized, we'll talk about next. There's also a new edition, and that's called the Key Uses edition. And this again is how the early childhood or early years is organized by recount, explain, argue, and discuss. So for our elementary years, they have slightly different criteria to meet key uses. But again, those are reviews of literature, empirical research, and analysis of our language standards for children at these grades. So let's keep thinking about how to interpret them and how to use them in this process. So again, they align with the access scores. So we have level 1 is entering, emerging, developing, expanding, bridging, and reaching. Okay. And so what I would do is I always keep it really simple for our example purposes. If I found out that my dual language learner, so Joey got a 3 in all the areas. So listening, speaking, reading, and writing, he got a 3. And so what I would do if I were considering, should I refer Joey for an evaluation? I would come here and either digitally highlight or on my paper base circle 3, 3, 3, and 3. And then I would look at these and see, is Joey reaching these expectations? Because what it means is that based on his access score in a quiet testing environment, Joey showed that he's a level 3 developing in listening. And so we have certain expectations that we have for his English language proficiency level, right? Because our access scores are telling us essentially their competency with the English language in a variety of different uses for speaking, reading, writing, and listening. And so if we were to look at a second grade example, English language proficiency level 3, it would tell you that in the area of listening, Joey should be able to identify who, where, and when of illustrated statements. In speaking, he can reproduce facts or statements in context. In reading, he should identify time-related language in context. And in writing, he should list ideas using graphic organizers. So this means that based on Joey's access scores, these are classroom skills that we would expect him to be able to do. Now, I'm going to point out a couple of things as we interpret this. I like to highlight for people these verbs. I think we have to really pay close attention to what the verb is saying, because this is not necessarily saying that Joey should be able to answer complex who, where, and when questions. This is saying that with illustration and at a statement level, not a paragraph or a story level, he should be able to identify the who, where, and the when. In speaking, he should be able to reproduce. So this isn't necessarily create facts, but again, that he's been told the facts and he's reproducing or repeating them, and he has context to support him. And again, in reading, identifying. So we want to think about that word identify. Does that mean label? Or does identify mean I give you two options and you identify which one is right? So I just like to highlight that sometimes we might look at the content, like, okay, he should know time-related language. Well, I think it's really important that we're looking at how we're expecting him to show his knowledge and what is the support given. That is crucial when we're interpreting these can-do descriptors. Because again, for writing, doesn't say he's going to write a paragraph. It says that he's going to list ideas with the support of a graphic organizer. So it's not saying that he's sharing or writing his ideas in full sentences even. It's saying that a level 3, a second grader, should be able to list ideas with the support of a graphic organizer. And again, an ELP, so a dual language learner whose English language proficiency is 3. I think that these are amazing tools for a couple of reasons. We often have unfounded expectations of our dual language learners. We really need to be intentional and thoughtful about what is their zone of proximal development, because they can only express to you and show you what they know at the highest level of their English language proficiency. So a couple of ways that this could be used is when you're considering, perhaps a teacher says they have concerns about Joey, they're coming to you, and this is maybe the second time they're saying, you know, I'm just really worried, he's just not keeping up in class. I really think we need to look at a referral. If you were to come to the can-do descriptors and say, okay, I hear you, you're concerned about Joey, let's do this. Talk to me about what he's able to do in the classroom. And if you broke these down and then gave like a check or a plus, and you get to the end and you go, well, it actually looks like he is able to perform in the classroom at his highest English language proficiency level. So I don't think that a referral to special education is warranted right now. We can continue to monitor Joey, but you even shared that he's doing some of the level 4 skills, and he tested at a level 3 last year. So it looks like he really is functioning in the classroom in his highest zone of proximal development for his English language proficiency level. Go ahead, Andrea.
I was just gonna say, we need to be careful when students are not in evaluation, how specific we get at a pre-referral level. If we're sitting on a problem-solving team and a student comes to us, we can talk about students for whom are at a level, 3 proficiency access score. This is what it would look like. I think talking in a more generalities before a referral is most appropriate.
Yes, and I would say in that instance, just reframe my example in that you're in an MTSS meeting and you're saying, oh, check this. Why don't you guys start here, right? That you're bringing this as a tool. So just as we might say, oh, these are developmental milestones for speech or language, and you're sharing a resource with the team. Yes, I think that great reminder, Andrea. Yes. Madison, how do EL teachers help in this process? And so it depends on the scenario and the role, but here's what I would say. If you were an EL teacher and perhaps, again, a teacher is saying that they're concerned, this is a really great starting point where either the EL teacher might observe the child in the classroom and just say, oh, you know what? He definitely matched the description to the photo or the picture today. I'm marking that one. I saw him do that in class. And so that could be one way. And again, offering it as a resource for the team to consider. So it's sort of like you don't have to be the one to fill it out, but even just educating others on its use. If you were thinking anything more specific, Madison, just pop it back in the chat. And then Kayla's wondering if we could clarify, using access scores to show a deficit. Oh yeah, let's pause there real quick. That's a great idea. Okay, so Kayla's wondering about teams might use access scores to show a deficit. And am I saying that that is what they can still do as a dual language learner at the highest level of their ability? Okay, Kayla, I love this. This is a great application. Big picture question. So I would say that if you're going to use access scores to show a deficit, in my experience, that is done by showing stagnant or extremely slow growth over time or loss. So I wouldn't look at access scores like we say a snapshot in time and say that this is evidence of a deficit because it's unique to that student. So I would want to have some comparisons. So just saying, oh, they're a level 1, that's a deficit. Well, what's their stage of language acquisition? Have they only been exposed to English for 6 months or 3 months? Then that might be what we expect, right? So it's in the interpretation. So again, if I see a low access score, I'm going to look at stage of language acquisition. Another way that you can use an access score to consider if it's a deficit, again, is longitudinally, and that might even just be a couple of years, right? But we should have multiple points to show, is there growth? Because they might, if you think about it, many of your students could be starting out at 1s, and that's not a deficit. That's a difference. If I'm in an English language immersion experience in kindergarten, well, being a 1 is not a deficit. right? That's not, I don't have an inability. I have a difference. I don't know the language you're speaking, right? So that would be the second point, stages, then longitudinally. And we talked a touch on this with access scores in day one. But if it's appropriate, work with your EL coordinator or staff member. You can actually do comparison to, for example, other second grade dual language students in your building, in your district. And sometimes that's helpful for staff to get a better picture of whether that is a deficit or not. And that's just, again, more globally looking at how are our other second grade dual language learners, how are they improving? What's their average score? How do we see that this student has a similar profile to them? Or is it very aberrant and something is standing out to us? What we're going to do is to close out our can-do descriptors. I want to give you, again, just some application options. So when you think about any of you who have been around long enough for the discrepancy model, right? There's a separate component that I did not mention about this. Yes, it's really helpful to say, do we have reasonable expectations for this dual language learner's ability to use English in the classroom? That's number one, right? And another item that comes up sometimes, often for full teams, if we're looking at LD, etc., is there a discrepancy? Is Joey scoring a 3, but he's not doing any of this in the classroom because of attention or because of behavior? Like, what is causing a discrepancy? And many teams, again, especially when they're looking at things like attention and behavior, they find it helpful to say, this is his capacity. This is his ability. He showed in testing that he can do these things. But when we go into the perfect storm of a classroom, he is not able to achieve this. So what is happening within that environment that's keeping Joey from reaching his potential or his ability? And so again, around attention and behavior, I sometimes see teams saying, gosh, that was really helpful to say, we have reasonable expectations for this dual language learner in the classroom. We're setting that bar based on the can-do descriptors. But there's something else. There's another factor that's coming into play in the classroom that doesn't allow him to reach this ability. And then another one is that I'm going to segue soon into assessment. And so we'll talk about how you might use these in your assessment and your own observations. So, like, to reiterate Andrea's statement, as we are looking at pre-referral, we might be recommending this to the MTSS team. We might be steering them towards it and having them assess if the expectations in the classroom align with the can-do descriptors to help them consider whether a referral is truly warranted. Next, after this, I will move into you as an evaluator. Okay, so what I would like you to do is please make sure, I want you to take the time right now to go to, if you haven't already, go to the participant folder and download the can-do descriptors that align with the populations that you serve. So pull those grade level clusters down. If you think you'll be sharing them with others, feel free to download the whole folder. And I did give you one folder for the original, and then I also gave you another folder for the key uses. So you can go ahead and pull those down. Now, the other thing I'd really like you to take a minute to do is we're just going to take a couple of minutes, but I want you to take that student, get that worksheet out, because last time you were to look up their access scores. And I do want you to take a moment and do exactly like we said. Go ahead and mark up on that PDF what are the expected can-do descriptors. And I'll just reiterate again, be sure you're matching. Listening might be a 4, but speaking might be a 2. I just use the same number to keep the example simple, okay? But again, you're going to want to make sure that you're getting the specific score that aligns for each of those 4 areas. So I'm going to give you just a moment to do that. And if not, at least pull it up and have it ready for you to explore.